Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our Overflow today, Monday, August. What is today? Oh, August
And
10th, 2020. Can't believe we're in August. This is crazy to me. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us, and we're so glad to have you here. As always on Overflow, our hope is to process the sermon, talk about it, talk about what we learned, ask some questions about it, and really hopes of how we can practically live this out in our daily life. So we hope today is helpful and encouraging and motivating. If you are watching live with us, we'd love to hear from you. So let us know you're here. Ask any questions in the chat box on YouTube, and we'd be happy to work those in and talk about them and even answer them. So today we have with us, who are you guys?
Oh, hi, I'm Erin.
hello, I am Ryan.
Kind of the same crew that's here a lot of the time. So hopefully you know them. But anyways, so glad to have you guys with us, and thanks for joining us for today's conversation on compassion and on the sermon. Very quickly, a recap of yesterday's sermon. We talked about compassion. We read out of Matthew 20, where Jesus is leaving Jericho with his disciples, and the crowds are following him. And a couple blind guys cry out, asking for mercy. Jesus approaches them and asks them what they would like. And they basically say, "Please heal us and give us our sight." And then it says that Jesus is moved with compassion, and then he heals them and invites them to follow him. And so the whole sermon was on compassion, how God has compassion on us, and how we are called to then have compassion on others. And so definitely check it out if you have not, but we're going to talk about it today. And with that being said, I would love to open us up by asking our icebreaker question from our life group questions, which is just when in your life have you experienced compassion? Maybe someone had compassion on you, or you had compassion on someone else. When have you experienced compassion, and what was that like?
Okay, I can go. Um, for me, my husband and I spent about maybe almost 4 years as foster parents. And I think that experience taught me the most about compassion, not only because it taught me to have compassion for kids and families who are in need, but because it taught me that compassion didn't look like what I had thought it would, so like when we went into foster care, it was like, okay, we're going to give homes to kids who need it, which is true. But also foster care involves compassion for families who've been broken apart by the foster system and helping to restore families. And compassion involves working with very overworked social workers in that context, specialists, attorneys. So all these people that were suddenly walking into our home, who had very draining or difficult stories. And so I think for me, that experience taught me that, like, well, first of all, compassion, I don't know, I don't want to say inconvenient, but it was one of those things that was like, I always had to make space for, um, to be compassionate and to extend compassion to someone. It always took time and energy, and it was worth it. Um, but yeah, that experience just taught me a lot more about what it means to live compassionately, and to see others with compassion. And so it really changed my view on a lot of things of how we live our day-to-day life in terms of compassion. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really like what you said there about like the inconvenience of compassion and needing to make space to in order to like have compassion and demonstrate that. What was one thing through that experience that maybe an interaction you had with someone, or a statistic that was shared, or a meeting you're at, that just really pulled on your heart to just say like, I want to do something. I want to be there.
Yeah, when we were looking into foster care, I think what it really was is, and I mean, we're in LA County, that's the county that we live in, but at the time, which would have been maybe 5 years ago, at the time in our county alone, there were 36,000 children in the foster system. For reference, in Orange County at the time, there were 3,000 children in the foster system, and 36,000 is actually also more than the entire state of Texas. Children who are in the foster system. And so for us, it was just knowing that there are that many children who need a safe home at night, and that many families who might need support being able to get their lives together so they can be a full family unit again. Yeah, it just kind of changes your perspective when you think about how high that number really is. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
For me, something that has increased my capacity for compassion is doing youth ministry. And I've been a leader or pastor in youth ministry for almost 8 years now, at a few different churches. And, you know, doing youth ministry, you see many different types of students walk through the door, of junior high and high school students. You see, you know, students with different behavioral issues who act out at youth group, who are angry, or, you know, you see all types of different things. And doing youth ministry, you also then interact with the parents. So how that's often increased my capacity for compassion is there's certain students who it's like, oh, they act out all the time, and a lot of other students don't like them because they're acting out and they get on all the other students' nerves. And it's really easy to have that like judgmental, annoyed response, like, oh, this person's a jerk because they do this or this or this. You know, that student is always like mean to other students and is angry all the time. um, and then seeing them interact with their parents, seeing their parents and seeing how their parents have treated them. I'm thinking of kind of one case in particular, but seeing the parent, how the parent treats the student, and this parent is very hard on their student, and that caused that one student to act out and be angry, and it kind of like you see how the family dynamics play out. And I was just think back, like if I was in seventh grade and that was my classmate, I would have never liked that student. I would have never been nice to that student because that probably would just annoyed me like he annoyed a lot of other students. So it's just, you see how family systems and dynamics play out, and you see that, you know, no one is born trying to aggravate, and you know, everyone wants to be loved, everyone wants to be accepted, and a lot of kids have very hard times with it based on their environments and very hard times fitting in. And you feel compassion for that and compassion for their struggle, and when you talk to them, you know, and get to know them and actually invest time in them and don't judge them right off the bat, you see more deeper sides of them, and you see the good sides of them more, even if it's hard sometimes with how they act. So that's just been a way I've grown in compassion, in seeing how kids have grown up, how their, you know, families have affected them, their relationship, their classmates have affected them, and having compassion for looking beyond the behavioral issue, looking beyond the you know, when they're like not listening at youth group or disrespecting the youth leader, youth pastor. You know, it's like we can't just let them do whatever they want at youth group because, you know, there's rules and stuff. But how do we minister to the student in a compassionate and loving way through the struggle? Because it's really easy to minister to the students who are listening quietly and want to, and are super excited to be there and are super nice all the time. It's really easy to love on those students, but how do we love on the students who tend to make it more difficult at times by looking past the surface and looking deeper, and then having that compassion on them? So I think that's been one way I've grown in compassion in the last many years of doing youth ministry.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that you, yeah, have that approach and that experience. And I feel like, again, consistent with what you shared, Aaron, about this, you need to have the capacity. It's almost easier to just get mad at these kids and like, why are you like this? Stop, you know. But to understand and ask
Yeah.
questions.
That's the easy automatic response. And just disclaimer, you know, I've done youth ministry for 8 years. It wasn't a New Life kid, so I just want to throw that out. Parents
That
listening.
would be a New Life kid that would fit any of those descriptions.
But I mean, I'm not. No comment. Okay. Anyways, no, I love them. My kids, they're great. So, anyways,
Yeah, I remember as a kid, you know, I would often see like maybe a homeless person or someone asking for money at the freeway exit, or someone pushing a cart kind of through the city, and just feeling like I wish somebody could help them, and I wish I could help them a place and be okay. And I just remember that growing up as a kid, just kind of thinking about that, and just thinking about wanting to help people. And I've taken a little bit of time to have some conversation with some people who don't have a place to live, or live on the streets. And there's some pretty crazy stories of what people have been through and what they've experienced and their hardship. And there's just a lot of need and a lot of hurt and a lot of brokenness. And I feel like the more I've spent time hearing people's stories, the more I just go like, wow, like you need care and you need help and you need love and you need support. And so, yeah, I think spending time listening to people's stories has always just really evoked compassion for me and understanding. And so I think that's been yeah, very like formative in my life as far as decisions on where I go and what I do and how to help and things like that. So, okay, anyways, well, let's get to some of these questions here. Our goal today is to really talk through not just what compassion is and how we've experienced it, but how to practically have compassion in our day-to-day life as we're working to become more like Jesus. So, how does Jesus demonstrate compassion in the Gospels? What are some of the examples that we see of his approach to compassion, how he expresses it, who he has compassion on, things like that?
Um, I think Jesus has compassion in the Gospels on people that their society often didn't expect you to have compassion on. I mean, even in this story, the blind men were not met with compassion by the crowd, by the rest of the Jews who were there. They were met with being rebuked and being silenced. And instead of that, Jesus met them with compassion. So I think consistently in the Gospels, the people Jesus has compassion on are very often people that normal society would not have compassion on. And I think about like the story of the Good Samaritan, because the Samaritans at Jesus' time were hated by the Jews. They were seen as this like group who had perverted the Jewish religion and who worshipped a false god and were breaking all the rules. They were neighbors and they did not like them. It was like kind of an ethnic and religious dislike for each other. And that's who Jesus made the hero of the story of the Good Samaritan. And rather than the priest or the Levite who passed the man who had been robbed by and left him there. And those were, big, big religious Jewish figures, the priest, oh, that's a holy man. Of course he's going to help, and he doesn't, and then the Good Samaritan is the one who helps. So I think Jesus is constantly challenging the Jewish people in his sermons and examples and parables and healings to have compassion on the people they don't want to have compassion on. So for me, that challenges me. Who do I, as an American, where I'm at today, who do I not want to have compassion on? Because that's the people Jesus is calling me to have compassion on. I'll hit the pause button there and I'll talk more about that later. Because yeah.
Go on forever. I appreciate that. Saving a little time for the rest of us.
Yeah, I just, yes. Anyways,
No, it's good. It was okay.
well, I haven't. That would spill into my answer for number 3 in a big way. So, yeah. Okay, you guys go ahead.
That's really funny. Gosh, I don't think I have any like specific examples off the top of my head. But when I do think about Jesus in the Gospels and like you're saying, how he treats people in the margins, I think what I think about a lot of times is that compassion is kind of messy. Like I think it kind of involves like, I don't know, like saying, I see you for who you are, despite maybe bad choices or just whatever it is, situation or margin, whatever. But it's really just kind of, I feel like Jesus was really willing to step into people's lives and live life with them, regardless of their station or position in life. And I don't know, I think that shows compassion too. It's like, I want to share a meal with you. I want to hear about your life. I want to bless you. I want to serve you. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, it's not a fully formed thought, but that's just kind of like what I've been pondering the last few days.
Yeah, for sure. And I've been thinking like the people Jesus doesn't seem to have compassion on are kind of like the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Romans and Caesar, and a lot of those in power and in control and influencers. and those who aren't repentant, those who don't have a humble posture, or those who think they've got it all together. And it's interesting that we see compassion on people who are aware of their need and express their need,
Mm.
uh, rather than, I would say, the Pharisees are just as much in need of Jesus as those in the margins. Yet Jesus seems to focus most of his compassion on those who are aware and express their needs.
And when you say who are aware and express their needs, that's basically people who are really screwed up. Society knows they're screwed up. And that's how they know their need and are aware and express it, because they're like, oh, I'm a sinner. I'm, like, the woman who came to Jesus who was a prostitute and washed Jesus' feet. Like, she knows her need because she knows her life's really messed up. And those are the people Jesus had compassion on, not the people who think, I'm a good Christian, I have it all figured out. Like the Pharisees are like, oh, I'm a good Jew, I'm a Pharisee, I follow the law, I have it all figured out. So, anyways.
Yeah, and to me, it seems like the Pharisees are pretty messed up too. You know, so
Mm-hmm.
you got a tax collector and you got the Pharisees, and they both are messed up, and they both need Jesus. Yet we see Jesus having compassion on the one who is aware of their brokenness, rather than just the ones who are like thinking they have it all together. So, yeah, I just think that that's kind of an interesting point that helps us to know that we should have a posture of humility that allows God, invites God into our brokenness, into our struggle, and allows him to have compassion on us. A lot of times I think we have better compassion on people than we do for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can just be, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
One phrase I like, or one quote I've liked. I mean, I don't know the quote exactly, but it's basically like, if you're listening to a sermon and you're thinking about which of your friends or what other group of people needs to hear this, you're not listening right, because you should be listening for yourself, and we all need to hear something. And I think that's true pretty much in 100% of sermons. Like, if you're thinking about how this sermon needs to impact other people's hearts, and you're not thinking about sermon needs to impact your heart, you're not listening right. So
yeah, I like
anyway,
that.
you need to be aware and of your needs. So yes. Anyways.
So how would you guys define godly compassion? If yeah, let's say someone's asking you, like, I don't really understand compassion, or maybe you're trying to explain it to a junior higher, or a child, or but yeah, how would you define and explain how what compassion is, and how to do it?
I think that talking about um, the definition of empathy, about feeling bad with someone, about putting yourself in their shoes. Like for me, when I see the kid who's acting out, and then I see how their like parents treat them, and I see that dynamic playing out, like I'm having compassion on them. I'm seeing their full situation, understanding who they are, and in some ways why they are the way they are. Um, and I think when possible, I mean, we can't obviously do this for everyone in society who we want to have compassion on, bringing about restoration, doing what we can to bring about restoration. In the case of youth ministry, I can do my best to bring about healing as a pastor in that situation by helping that person walk through their issues, talk through their issues, and try to help them experience Jesus in a powerful way that helps them grow and heal from some of their hurt. And those are always difficult, long processes that never happens in a week or two. It's all solved or anything. Um, but trying to be a people who are empathetic, who feel bad with someone, who hurt with someone, try to walk through it with them and try to find ways to bring about restoration, as you talked about in your sermon, Ryan. And I also like that phrase, the stirring of the bowels, just like, not a distant, oh, that's not my problem. Like, you said you hate that phrase, Ryan. The stirring of the bowels, like I feel it for them and I feel it in my gut. And it's just like, I see the struggle they're going through, and it's like gut wrenching. Like, I think, and therefore from that place of that response, doing something about it, and doing something about it and trying to help them in some way and care for them and love them and pray for them. So
Yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I would say um, like genuine concern for the sufferings of others. But then, yeah, I think for it to be godly compassion, it can't stop there. It can't just be like, oh, I feel really terrible for that person. but I'm not inclined to do anything about it. So I think there definitely has to be some kind of action there, whether it's prayer or just something. The ultimate goal, right, would be to lead that person to know the love of Christ more.
Yeah.
Right. Or that situation or that group, and like, how can we actively show compassion? I think there's definitely an action component to that when we're talking about godly compassion, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And like the foster care system in LA, 36,000 kids. Obviously, there's no way that any one of us could impact all of them directly, but at the very least, we can pray for them, and prayer does have impact. So we can do that, and that is one way to help bring about restoration, because prayer is powerful. So that's one active thing.
Yeah, I actually like that you bring that up, because I feel like we can have conversations like this, big conversations about compassion, and then people might turn around and be like, well, I can't foster a child, or I can't, go out and find all the homeless in my community. And I think sometimes compassion too can involve behind the scenes things. Like just a few months ago, we take our Change for Christ every quarter, and last quarter, we made 400 hygiene kits, and 5 people gave up 3 hours on a Sunday, and they came and they assembled all these bags. Well, they're never going to probably meet any of the people that these are blessing, but they still had compassion, and they used their time to make a difference and to bless someone else. And so I think sometimes compassion, we talk about it, it can feel like a really big task that we take on, but I think there are a lot of little things that we can also do to support other ministries that show compassion, anything like that. I think there's a lot of options as far as like what that kind of action looks like.
Yeah, I feel like it's like, okay, what can we do? So maybe we can't join the foster system today, but do we know anyone who's in the foster system that we could say, hey, how can we support that family and what they're going through? Talking to some families, hey, what resources do you need, or what help do you need, or how can we support you? I just feel like, yeah, there's lots of little things we could do to contribute, even if it's not necessarily, jumping in the system like right away and being ready for that. Even just spending time. I feel like, Aaron, you could probably speak to this, but just spending time and hearing stories, or just listening, or just being present to someone going through stuff, or whatever it is they're going. I was reminded of when a lot of the stuff was coming out in the media as far as like Black Lives Matter and just a lot of the recent killings and stuff like that. One of the things we did as a church is we had a meeting with our leaders, and we just gave space for people to just share where they had experienced hurt or trauma or pain or injustice. And even just giving people a space to share, is just one way to be present and to get involved. But I totally agree with you, Aaron. Like, Christians are horrible at leaving things in conversation and not doing things. And I think I find in my own mind, often I'm convincing myself why I just can't do something about someone or something. I see a significant need, and then I go, well, I can't really make a difference, and I can't really go over to that part of the world, and I can't really this, and I don't really have the time, and I don't really have the money, and I'll give like 15 reasons in my mind that justify why I should do nothing. And it's like, I want that to change. I want that to be different. I want to come up with 15 ways I can actually help and do something about this, even if they're small or simple or temporary, Yeah, good thoughts. When I think about compassion too, I think about noticing people, knowing their background, caring for them, and being present with them, and just having a lot of understanding, and not necessarily judging where they've been or what they've done or what they've been through, but really approaching things with uh, valuing their experience and their perspective, and validating what they've been through, and not just judging them. I think those are helpful parts of the definition there. So that kind of leads us to like, well, then who should we have compassion on? Part of me thinks everybody needs it. It's like everyone's going through something and they need help. Part of me is like, does anyone really need it? Or should they just make it through on their own? So what do you guys think? Who are we called to biblically have compassion on?
So this is where I cut myself off earlier because I didn't want to jump the gun, but talking about how people's environments affect them and all that. And also thinking about, this is a group, these are the people who the mainstream, most of the Jews who were around Jesus told the blind people to be quiet and they rebuked them because they were stepping out of their bounds and they were blind. So because they were sinners or their parents were sinners and they deserved it. And God caused that to happen. That was their theology, which Jesus rebuked in his time. But that, then we should think as Americans, who do we think they deserve it? Because that's who the Jews thought deserved it. So for us, who do we think deserves it? First thing that jumps to mind is people in the prison system, people who are incarcerated. For example, someone who gets a DUI, maybe someone who gets arrested for domestic abuse or something like that. And I'm not saying like those people shouldn't be arrested or they shouldn't be punished in some way for their crime. But having compassion means going beyond just thinking about, oh, those terrible people, they deserve it. For example, someone who gets arrested for a DUI, they struggle with alcoholism. Perhaps their mom drank during the pregnancy, they have fetal alcohol syndrome, and they're predisposed to be addicted to alcohol, or maybe their dad drank a lot growing up. And we see those things play out in their life, and we see how there are ways in which they've had that struggle in their life way bigger than I ever would growing up in my situation, my parents, so that's not an issue. Or someone, who is arrested for something like domestic abuse. That's an awful thing. I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying it shouldn't be punished, but often those are caused by cycles of sin, and their parents abused them. That's the only thing they knew growing up, and therefore it got passed on. And I think about there's one study where there was like a species of birds where they would often, like, if something was wrong with like a bird or they had a defect, they would bully that bird and like not let them like hang out with the flock, and they'd often be on like the edge and stuff. Then the study also showed that and that they'd often do that to baby birds too. The study showed that baby birds who were bullied often became the instigators who bullied later on in life. Like once the baby bird grew up, they started bullying other birds and other, anyway, so it's just like it's so wired in our nature. We learn from where we're at. So how do we have compassion on the people in our society who we think deserve it, who deserve what they get? Because it's so easy to look at the prison population or people who are arrested and write them off as, well, they made their bed and now they have to lie in it and it's their own fault. That's what the people of Jesus's time thought about the blind people, and that's why they told them to be quiet. So I don't think we're called to think that way about anyone. And what I'll also say is, and then things like drug addiction, alcoholism, like, personally, I think we spend too much time incarcerating and arresting people for that, not much time going about programs of treatment and rehab. And so maybe thinking about, I think those type of changes would be a way to show compassion within our American system of how we deal with things like that. And thinking, I'll try one more group I'll talk about briefly. The homeless population, for example. Like if you're blind or crippled in Jesus' time, you would beg, and that's how they would get money and survive. And today, when there are people who are homeless, they beg, and if you walk by, you might give them a $5 bill or something. But when the blind people in Jesus' time spoke up and said, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us," the crowd told them to be quiet because they weren't filling into their societal role of begging. When a homeless person interacts with any of us in any way that isn't begging for money, we would tend to turn ourselves off immediately to it. And I think in some ways, and we'd be like worried about our safety and things like that, and I'm just saying, like, I think it's the same phenomena going on there, where it's like, as soon as the homeless person steps out of their role of begging for money, or the blind person in Jesus' time steps out of that role, we get uncomfortable and we tell them to stop. So I just think there's a lot of things about this passage and this example of how we think about compassion in this radical way that should really challenge how we operate personally as Christians and how our society operates, and thinking about how we can go about remedying some of these things that I think are broken in society by having compassion on people. Yes, that was a lot. So those are my thoughts on who should we have compassion on, especially people who don't seem to deserve compassion. Because again, the people in Jesus' story are the blind people are the people that no one wanted to have compassion on. So who do we as Christians in America not want to have compassion on? Jesus is calling us to have compassion on them. Yeah, that's
That's a good word. I have nothing to add to that.
Why? I think that was really good. Yeah, I love that approach of really saying who in society have we deemed deserves to be where they are, and therefore we do not need to have compassion on that situation. But how can we then kind of reverse that and express compassion and care for them? I think that's great. I think that's really good, and I think that's a great place to start for us as we consider how to be proactive about compassion, not just reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I'll make this one quick. There's also like the racial component of all the the examples of police brutality we've seen that have become public through social media over the last 10 plus years. Um, and there are always going to be people say, oh, well, if they weren't breaking the law, this wouldn't have happened. Like in the case of George Floyd, he was accused of having counterfeit money, and maybe he did. So some people say, well, he was a criminal and he was breaking the law, and if he wasn't doing that or resisting arrest, he wouldn't have died or something like that. And I don't think that's a compassionate response, because there's clearly brokenness in the system. So I will say, if you want to grow and become educated in those issues, watch a documentary called The 13th. It's on Netflix. It's fantastic. You learn so much, even if you're like kind of, you don't, even if you like, you don't like the Black Lives Matter movement at all. It's not about that. It's just about seeing how racism is played out in this country and learning about it. So if you're wherever you stand on political issues or societal issues, I encourage you to go watch it. It's a great learning experience. It's called The 13th. It's on Netflix. Search it up. You'll find it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great closing thought, and these are great thoughts. And I'll just ask, does anyone have any final thoughts or final encouragements as we are focused on how to engage with Christ-like compassion in our everyday living?
I have one. I think I think this is one of those things that we're really good. There's a lot of needs, right? And so we're really good at saying there are so many needs to be compassionate about. And I think sometimes we can turn around from a conversation like this and feel overwhelmed. And I think sometimes, we just need to take a first step. Might not be a big first step, or it might not feel like a big first step. But I think one of the best ways to become a more compassionate person is to practice compassion. And sometimes, that starts with something small that not a lot of people might not see. And then sometimes it's something big. And I think both are valuable in the kingdom of God. And so, I guess my biggest encouragement and takeaway would be, don't walk away from a conversation on compassion without thoughts about how maybe you can become a more compassionate person in the name of Jesus, or are asking God to show you, where in my life do I have space, or can I make space to be a more compassionate person, to show compassion to someone. So yeah, that's my final thought.
Yeah, I love that idea of starting simple. It doesn't have to be like have compassion on this entire movement or industry or like issue injustice thing, but find something simple or small or everyday that you can engage with. I think that's great. And for me, it would just be the challenge of sometimes it's hard if we feel like we have full lives to go out of our way to be proactive about compassion on something that's going on that is not in our daily life rhythm. And so I think one thing that I think would be helpful is just go about your life normally, how you would normally go about it. But whoever you interact with, prayerfully in your own mind, say, God, how can I have compassion on this person or in this situation? Or how can I express compassion? And I think you'll find that even in our everyday interactions, even in a COVID-19 stay at home ordered, you know, lifestyle, there are people we interact with who need compassion daily. And just having that approach, being ready to give compassion, I think will just help us to do much better at that and to be open to that as well. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Aaron and Ryan, for being here. And thank you so much to all of you who've watched this. And we hope it's been a blessing and helpful and inspirational. And we're excited for you to go and be compassionate, just like Christ is. And we hope that you have a great week.
Bye.
Okay. Adios.